Hello, everyone, and welcome back if you attended some of the previous webinar shows, I guess, and happy Arbor Day. So my name's Piper, and I'm an intern at the Cornell Forest Restoration Project in Oswego. And my co-host, Kristen Haynes, she is the Assistant Director of and she's kind of leading the Canal Forest Restoration Project along with Professor Mohammed. Just probably all of you know, just keep yourself, please keep yourself muted during the presentation. And right now, Erin Wightman from the Cornell Maple Program will be presenting about his harvesting maple and all of the corresponding, I guess, requirements.
I am relocating. My internet is not working for me. I apologize for that. Hopefully this will work better. So just give me a signal if I start freezing up.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. It's good to see everyone. My name is Erin Wightman. I'm the co-director of the Cornell Maple Program and the New York State Maple Specialist. And I'm going to share my screen here quickly. And today I'm going to talk about the role of forests in protecting our environment, especially as it relates to the food supply. So just a moment here while I get things squared away. Okay. You never know what kind of technology glitches you're going to run into when you do these things. You always find out right when you get started. So I apologize for the delay. So I'm going to talk about the role of forests in a sustainable food supply. So as I said, I'm with the Cornell Maple Program. We're a research and extension program housed within the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell University. And we have 2 research stations that we operate. I oversee our Arnott Forest Research Station, which is just south of Ithaca, New York, in central New York. We have about 7,500 trees tapped in a 300-acre sugar bush. And we have a large commercial sugar house that we're in the process of setting up 2 separate evaporator and reverse osmosis systems. So it's a controlled processing system, so we can do controlled experiments in that. We also have a second research forest in Lake Placid, New York, which also has about 7,000 trees tapped and a large sugar house and commercial kitchen. And that's operated by my co-director, Adam Wild. And so we do research in the whole spectrum of maple syrup production, starting in the sugar bush, so providing recommendations on the best way to maintain forest health. Also sap collection systems, the optimal design to collect the maximum amount that we can sustainably harvest of sap through out of the sugar bush. And we research the most optimal syrup processing methods, so quality control and efficiency in the sugar house. And lastly, we look at new product development. And what you're seeing here in this little picture on the left are some of our maple wine trials that we conducted with the Cornell Enology and Viticulture Department. So we're looking at a whole wide range of new products that can be created using maple sap and maple syrup. So it's a pretty comprehensive effort. It's a pretty large program. We're probably the largest maple research program in the world. And so we got a lot of exciting research coming out of our program. I have to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. We're a 100% grant funded program, and a lot of our funding comes from USDA and New York State. And we also receive support from Cornell University from our department. So I'm going to start with a question today. And the question is, where does our food come from, right? In my house, we do a little Japanese prayer before we eat. We clasp our hands, always say "itadakimasu," which means it's a reflection on where our food comes from. So every time we eat, we think about it. And I think that's something that people do more and more, is think about where their food comes from. There's growing awareness of it. Sometimes it's easy to fall into the habit of thinking it comes from the grocery store, or not thinking beyond the grocery store. Maybe we see fruit in the bins, we see processed foods on the shelves, and maybe sometimes don't think about all the steps that took place before it reached the shelf. But increasingly, people are thinking about that. So agriculture uses up a huge amount of land, and it has huge impacts, right? So not only to the land, but also to our water supply. And if you've ever heard the term non-point source pollution, that refers to pollutants that come from broad areas or large sources like agriculture. So think all the sediment that runs off a field that's been tilled ends up in our waterways. Fertilizers and herbicides are also non-source point pollutants. They end up in our waterways in great quantities, and it's a really huge impact that results from agriculture, traditional agriculture, right? And also agriculture uses up a lot of water, and that's really important in some areas of the world. So because consumers are a lot more aware of this, they're starting to vote with their pocketbooks, right? They'll buy products that they think are ethically produced, especially with regards to environmental impacts. And some of the terms that come up a lot now in the food products industry are sustainable, local, clean label, and all natural. So these are featured really prominently on a lot of foods right now because they add value to the food if consumers believe it's produced in a sustainable fashion, or locally produced, or clean label, right? So that's kind of the context we're in right now, with ethically motivated consumers and also an industry that's shifting towards products that are produced in a better way. So let's refine our question a little bit. Let's say, where does our sugar come from? Right, I'm just gonna leave my screen this way because it's working right now instead of going full screen. But so the question is now, and especially as a maple producer, right? Where does your sugar come from? And this is really important because Americans eat about 150 pounds of sugar a year. I mean, that seems like a lot, and it is a lot. So it's a really significant part of our diet. So where does a lot of that sugar come from? What are the alternatives? Well, one of the main sources of our sugar is high fructose corn syrup, right? So it's a corn-derived product. So corn is pretty ubiquitous in our farming landscape. There's a huge amount of corn planted across the United States, and 4 million acres of that at present goes toward the production of sugar or sweeteners. It requires huge amounts of energy, both in the manufacturing portion of the production of high fructose corn syrup and also just in the cultivation of the corn. And it's really heavily refined. And also really importantly, if you look at a cornfield, so if you look at this picture down in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a monoculture. There's nothing there but corn and bare soil. It doesn't provide any sort of habitat value to wildlife, insects, or any of that. So presumably before the cornfield was there was some type of natural ecosystem, a forest or a grassland, which did provide those services. And now we've replaced it with something that doesn't. So that's a pretty huge environmental impact. So the soil is tilled, which destroys a lot of the soil structure, heavily impacts the soil biome, so all the creatures that live in the soil. The soil is exposed to erosion during much of the year, so we're actually losing topsoil. Corn requires a lot of chemical inputs in terms of fertilizers and herbicides, so it can grow quickly in those type of settings. And then during the off season, there's really no cover or anything for wildlife, so it doesn't provide a lot of value there either. So corn doesn't look like a really great alternative to produce our sugar from an environmental standpoint, right? So what are some of the other options? Well, another common source of sugar in the US is sugar beets. There's about 1 million acres of that being used to produce sugar. Again, requires a huge amount of energy to produce it. It's heavily refined, and it too is grown in monocultures. So the soil has to be heavily tilled and then planted with just one crop. So it has all the same negative components that high fructose corn syrup has. And lastly, our other common source of sweetener is cane sugar, of course, right? And that's what our bags of crystallized sugar, that's usually sourced from sugarcane. There's also almost 1 million acres of that. And it, again, has all the same negative environmental consequences that corn and sugar beets have. So this is the good part. I love this slide. So here's where maple comes in, right? So with maple production, we have something totally different. We produce maple syrup from completely intact forest ecosystems. We don't alter them at all. We walk into the forest with our collection system, we install it. It is not invasive. It doesn't have any negative impacts on the forest. We collect the sap. The sap collection process doesn't harm the trees. There have been many studies on this, and the amount of sap that's extracted from the trees doesn't impact their growth rate or their vigor or their health. It's really a small injury that we create to the tree when we drill a little hole. Trees are really good at healing injured parts of their stem. So, trees sometimes like split completely in half. They get struck by lightning or damaged in wind events, and they can go on living just fine. So the little tiny hole we drill to collect sap doesn't really represent a substantial injury for them. So we take that sap that we collect out of the intact forest, we process it with new energy efficient technology, most importantly, reverse osmosis technology, which is a way that we extract most of the water at a very minimal energy cost. And then we just boil it. So the byproducts are some CO2, but that's really dependent on the fuel type. If we're using firewood, then it's almost a sustainable CO2 balance. And steam is our other byproduct. And so in the end, we get a pure product. It's just maple sap that's been concentrated and boiled. And a lot of times it's locally produced. So most maple syrup farms are small family-owned businesses that sell their product locally. So you're also eliminating the environmental impact of transporting the product over long distances, right? So if we look at that, growing our sugar in a forest environment makes a lot of sense from an environmental standpoint. And it's a pretty big contrast, right? If we look back at those other slides, we're seeing basically an ecological wasteland where fields are tilled and sprayed with chemicals compared to a healthy, intact forest that still has all the wildlife, has the intact soil, and has a really diverse ecosystem. So that seems great. But what if we can do even better than that? What if we can leverage that industry to incentivize maple producers to actually improve their forests, right? Because now that we're making money from the forest, maybe we can capitalize on the ethical consumerism that people have, where they're motivated by their ethics to buy things that are produced ethically, to incentivize maple producers to spend a little money and time to improve the structure of their forest, right? And in fact, we are doing that. And this is just one example. And this slide here is showing a program that was recently launched. It's called the Bird Friendly Maple Initiative. And it's taking place in both New York and Vermont. And the basic idea of the program is maple producers have a forester from the Audubon Society come in and assess their forest, and then they devise a plan to improve the habitat quality. And once that plan is implemented, and when I say habitat quality, it is specifically in relation to forest dwelling birds of special concern, like the scarlet tanager, cerulean warbler, and other birds that really rely on forest habitat for breeding. So if they implement those practices in their forest, then they can get a special sticker and some marketing materials to go along with their syrup that say this maple syrup was produced in a forest that's managed for bird habitat. Presumably, that will allow them to charge something of a premium for their product. And in fact, that seems to be the case, that maple producers that have gone through this process can charge a little bit more for their syrup, and they seem to have increased sales because birding is actually a huge industry in the United States. Bird watchers spend something like $40 billion a year on their hobby. So they're really interested in supporting birds. So, and this is one way they can do it. So it adds value to the product. And the program requires things like improving structural diversity. And what that means is when you go into a forest, that it has green all the way up from the forest floor to the very top of the forest canopy. Sometimes you walk into a forest and at first glance, to the layman's eye, it might look like a healthy forest because there are trees. But then you sometimes notice that there's no leaves, there's nothing actually growing between the forest floor and the very top of the forest canopy. So it's just structurally, it's very simplistic. It's just got tall, mature trees. What we want are trees in the understory as well, layers of vegetation. So those small trees, shrubs, and then a lot of plants growing on the forest floor. So that's one of the requirements of the program, is that there's some provision in the sugar bush management plan to create that type of structural diversity. Another requirement is that there is species diversity. So you want more than just maple trees in your forest, right? So, and there are ways to manage for that, to select for that, or add those trees of different species. And that's important because birds require that diversity, right? For mast, and meaning the seeds that the tree produces. Birds can require a variety of different seed types. Different species of trees have different types of bark, which can house different populations of insects. So if you imagine a tree with really shaggy bark, oftentimes there are more insect larvae under the peely bark sections, and that's important forage for certain birds. So the diversity is really important. And structurally, it's also important to have woody material laying on the ground, right? Because that's where a lot of decomposers live, mushrooms, insects, things like that. And it's also a different type of habitat cover. And having that down woody material is important in a variety of ways to different birds. So maple producers that sign up for this program go through all those steps. They end up with a more structurally and biologically diverse forest that provides really good habitat for birds. So now we're suddenly improving forest habitat instead of degrading it through our food production. And they're rewarded for their efforts by being able to market themselves differently. And that's important in a business like maple syrup production, where the product is pretty similar across the board. I mean, if you're making maple syrup and at one farm, it's going to look a lot like maple syrup produced at another farm. So it's hard to differentiate your product, but this is one way that maple producers can do it. They can have the bird-friendly logo and marketing materials, and everybody wins. So the birds win, the maple producers win, and the consumer wins because they get a product that's made in a sustainable fashion. So maple is a better sugar, and we can do it in a way that actually improves habitat. Let's think even more broadly. What if we go beyond maple syrup, right? Go beyond thinking about sugar. What if we can make a whole variety of different products from that, right? And fill more of our food supply or our cosmetic needs with things that are produced in that very sustainable fashion. And these are all things that we're making right now from maple sap and maple syrup. We're making all kinds of candies, right? Cotton candy, maple cotton candy is great if you like cotton candy. Maple beer can be pretty good. We're working on developing new formulas and best practices for using maple and brewing. We've made some great sodas that are sweetened 100% from maple. If you live in the Catskills area, you can go to Roxbury Mountain Maple and actually buy this ginger soda in the bottom left corner, and it is phenomenal. It is really delicious. We can also just make plain old sugar, right? That people can use in place of table sugar. We've made sports supplements. So this is a sports gel that can be used during marathons, things like that. Chocolate, lip balm, wine. So there's a whole spectrum of products we can make from this very sustainable agricultural system, right? Let's go a step further than that even. let's think more broadly about all the foods that we could grow in association with maple trees in a maple forest. And this is a practice that's known as agroforestry. So agroforestry is just growing crops and trees together. There are a lot of different ways this can take shape, a lot of different types of agroforestry. The limiting factor in a forest, the main one is light, sunlight, right? So that you can't plant corn in a forest, but there are a lot of things you can grow in a forest. And one of the common foods right now that's being grown in forest environment is shiitake mushrooms, right? It's a really popular food. And the way they're grown is on inoculated logs, right? So logs, fresh logs are harvested from a forest, and there's certain species that are preferred. And then there are holes drilled in the logs. It's inoculated with the mycelium of the mushrooms and sealed off with wax. And then the logs are stacked in the understory of a forest. The mycelium of the fungus grows through the logs, and then it fruits. When the logs are dipped in water, usually you can force them to fruit. And you can produce a huge crop of mushrooms in the same place that you're growing trees that are producing maple sap to make maple syrup. Right, so you're now growing two crops, and it does occupy some space on the forest floor, but it doesn't displace most of the species present in a forest in any significant way. So there's not a real environmental impact to that either, and we're growing another food product, right? So it's another thing that can go on the table in place of something that would have been produced in a more intensive agricultural method. We can also grow medicinal plants in a forest. So this is a picture of ginseng. So ginseng is still a really popular nutritional supplement, medicinal plant. It's worth a lot of money. So in terms of a sustainable agricultural system from a financial standpoint, it can be a very valuable crop that's added into a sugar bush, and it grows really great under sugar maple. So we can grow food and medicine in this same forested environment. And this is a native plant, and it also is part of the native ecosystem. So again, we're growing food and medicine now from a really intact forest environment. And there are other things we can grow too, and we're kind of on the cutting edge of this. Elderberries are a native plant. Bottom right corner, these are elderberries. You probably see these in the woods sometimes when you walk through the woods. These are Juneberries. It's from a genus of trees called Amelanchier or shadbush, Juneberry. It goes by a lot of different names, but it's a really common understory tree that produces very edible, delicious berries. So now we can start layering a crop production system in the forest. If we add these small trees and shrubs and medicinal plants and mushrooms, all of a sudden we have a forest food production system that has a lot of different components. And we're still dealing with native plants for the most part. And we're doing it in a way that allows the forest to still provide all of its habitat benefit, its ecosystem services. And so it's a really much more sustainable system than what we were looking at in those first few slides with corn and sugar beets and sugar cane. But what if we take it even a step further? What if we can raise our animals in a forested environment? And this is actually an area of active research, and there are farms that do this right now. The practice called silvopasturing, where you're growing some forage or providing forage opportunities in a forest environment. So you can graze cattle that way and put plenty of pounds on a cow with forest-grown forage. One of my colleagues here at Cornell actually has a huge silvopasture farm at his own personal farm. That's a demonstration site that a lot of people come to see how this works. And compared to the typical pastures in the region that are just barren grasslands that are pretty beaten up, his pastures are beautiful. His cows are healthy, and it's a really pleasant type of system to even just stand and watch the cows under the trees eating the grass. It's a really beautiful way to raise cattle. And you can raise chickens that way too. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that. So forests can have a huge role in growing food. And it's something that I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg for the opportunity this represents. Maple production has been increasing dramatically. In New York State alone, we've quadrupled production in the past 15 years. It's gone from an annually about 200,000 gallon output industry in New York State to over 800,000 now. And New York has the most tappable maple trees of any state in the country. We have somewhere around 300 million trees that we could be tapping. Right now, we're tapping about 2% of them. This number isn't updated, sorry, on this slide. We're closer to 2% now, 2% utilization. So we have huge opportunity to grow this industry. So it could be really important for farmers and landowners, could be a way to revive our rural communities, but at the same time, grow healthy food and do it in a way that's really sustainable and good for the environment. So this is an Arbor Day presentation. So hopefully that gives a whole different perspective on the importance of trees, right? We think about trees as being important for clean air, clean water, but they also have a role to play in our food production system. And I think that's really exciting. Maybe that's the nerdy researcher in me, but there are so many questions we can ask. There's so much room for innovation. And I think it's something that it's going to play a huge role in our future food production systems. So I'll go ahead and take questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen because that seems to be the source of the trouble today. And I apologize again for the really glitchy start here, but hopefully you're able to see most of the presentation. And I see there's a question in the chat box, so I'll address that real quick. The Maple Managed for Birds program is managed by the New York State Audubon Society, which is a chapter of the National Audubon Society, and it is available to any maple producer in New York State. And there is a web page, and I would share the link, but I'm afraid to do anything on my computer at this point. It's pretty easy to find. If you just search for bird-friendly maple or maple and birds and New York Audubon Society, you should be able to find the link. Or you can email me afterwards and I'll send you the link directly.
So feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question for Aaron or stick it in the chat. I do have one question, Aaron. So I, when I'm buying maple syrup, some are labeled organic, some are not. And I've always kind of wondered, so if you're buying non-organic syrup, are there maple producers that use pesticide in a sugar bush? Or is it just kind of like the difference between some who, like, is all maple basically organic and people don't use pesticides, but some producers like seek this certification and some don't? Or is there like a fundamental difference?
Yeah, that's a great question, because maple syrup by its nature is basically an organic product. And there are very few points where it deviates from certified organic syrup. So it is possible that pesticides would be applied in a forest environment, mainly in the form of herbicides. One of the main management challenges in a sugar bush right now is trying to regenerate maple trees, so grow new maple trees. And one of the problems that prevents that is actually beech. So beech trees have a disease called beech bark disease that was imported. I think it became really common in the 1960s, and it's been spreading. And what it does is it kills beech trees, it kills the stems, but beech trees respond to that by growing new, like, sprouts, root suckers they're called. So if you kill the main stem of a big tree, it sprouts up 100 or 1,000 little whips, little sprouting stems, and they suppress all the other regeneration in the area. They create what we call beech thickets. And when that starts happening, you can't really grow new maple trees. One way to combat that is to cut down beech trees and then treat the stump with an herbicide, usually glyphosate or Roundup, and that kills the root system. But that makes the forest no longer organic because you're introducing a synthetic herbicide. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that forests can be treated for insect invasions. So forest tent caterpillar is a major pest of maples, and it comes through in big waves. Gypsy moth also. And those are usually treated with what's basically an organic treatment. It's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria, BT. But I don't believe the organic certifiers allow that. So that would also disqualify a sugar bush from being organic. And those are the main things in the sugar bush, but also there's certain collection system components, like there are different fittings that can be used in sap collection systems that have embedded silver. So that's an antimicrobial treatment. It's just like what's used in a hospital for that type of tubing that's used for humans. So it's like a medical grade tubing, and the silver is just an ionic form of silver that can kill bacteria. That's sometimes used in sugar bushes. So that would not be considered organic either. And then in the sugar house, when you're actually boiling the sap, there are additives that prevent foam buildup in the evaporator. And there are some that are organic and some that aren't. And the ones that work really, really well with a very small amount added to the syrup are inorganic. They're a glycerin-based type substance. The ones that work less well, the organic ones, are actually like organic vegetable oils. So, but they don't work very well, and they add flavor to the food. So those are the main control points that differentiate between organic and inorganic. But essentially, for almost, they're essentially the same. It's a really small difference, and there aren't a lot of inputs into natural, regular maple syrup.
Thanks.
Okay, I have a question if possible.
Mhm.
Okay, so some time ago, we visited India, the Bengal region, and there they collect a sap from some kind of palm trees.
Mhm.
The difference is when they collect the sap, they don't boil it. So they make it into drink and sell it as such. But they notice bats contaminate drink from that sap in the buckets. And that actually transmit diseases. So I know actually in our case, the maple syrup is boiled, so that will sterilize it anyway. But did you notice any bats or anything we should be concerned about feeding from the syrup when in the buckets?
That's a really fascinating point to bring up, and it's in the whole palm wine industry is very interesting to me. Palm trees have really high sugar content. So maple trees produce sap that has about 2% sugar, whereas palm trees, their sap has 11 to 15% sugar. So you can collect it and drink it, or it's so warm in those environments. There's so much natural yeast in the atmosphere, you can leave it through the day and then it becomes wine. It's like 4 to 6% alcohol just at the end of the day, just from sitting. So that's really fascinating to me. With the food safety question, maple sap is mostly collected in closed tubing systems now. And so there's really no opportunity for wildlife to get into the sap for the most part. And it's actually, these systems are closed because they're attached to high capacity vacuum pumps. So we collect most of our sap under vacuum, usually somewhere in the 25, 26 inches of vacuum range. So near complete vacuum through the whole collection system. So it has to be really tight and well maintained in order to maintain that vacuum to increase production. So that really precludes wildlife from getting into the sap directly. They sometimes chew the tubing and damage it. And every once in a while, you can end up with some type of wildlife getting into your holding tanks. It's really rare because we're operating during a very cold part of the year. But sap is always filtered before it goes in the evaporator. It's boiled at high temperature. It finishes at 220 degrees, and it's required to be hot packed at least 180 degrees into clean, sterile containers. And it's filtered before it goes in at that temperature. So there's really minimal risk from the food safety standpoint. And it's very stable because it's so high sugar, it has low water activity, and it can go into just stainless steel barrels and sit at room temperature and sit for 5 or 6 years and be completely unspoiled. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have time for any other questions?
I just have a quick question. Now I have recently noticed more and more sugar being added into things that come from like coconut sugar and like other fruits. I think like monk fruit sugar and stuff. I was wondering how like sustainable those practices are and like how that compares to, I guess like this is I imagine it's better still, more sustainable to get the maple because it's local. Like we don't have coconuts here, but I was just curious to like, I guess where they're at with coconut sugar and that. So
Right. I think there's a lot of alternative sweeteners on the market now, agave, coconut, and there's a lot of attempts to make our traditional sources of sugar sound more palatable, like raw cane sugar, organic raw cane sugar, and things like that. And it really depends on where and how it's grown. Something like agave, I believe, is grown in monocultures and cultivated fields. Coconuts, I'm not sure exactly what those systems look like. I know there's a move toward a lot of land clearing and planting of palm trees in a lot of areas for the oil and things, and perhaps for the sugar as well. And I think it's really rare to have something like maple where you can actually just walk into a wild native ecosystem and collect a food product at such great quantities. And maple trees are a really common tree in New York, Vermont, parts of Canada. And so that's what makes it viable, is that you can walk into a woods and have 100 trees per acre that are tappable and collect a really significant volume of sap. And so I don't think any other sweeteners really measure up in that category.
thank you.
Yeah, plus maple tastes better.
Okay, briefly, I know the time is almost gone, and I'm sorry for asking again. Just give us an idea. If the maple trees are affected by this harvest, especially now I hear that you're using pump to suck up the sap. So what's the effect on trees?
So that's been studied very, very intensively. And the actual carbohydrate extraction, so removing the energy reserves from the tree, and the amount that we do, even with high capacity vacuum pumps, is almost immeasurable. And it appears to be a completely sustainable practice. The issue we do run into is when we create a hole in the tree, the tree responds by compartmentalizing that hole. So it blocks off that hole. And that's part of its protection mechanism and its healing mechanism. But it doesn't just block right around the hole. It creates a whole column that's about sometimes 30 inches long total. So 15 inches above and below that tap hole of wood that's no longer conducting sap. It's non-conductive wood. The tree hardens the vascular cells with different substances so that they're impermeable and they're somewhat resistant to rot and invasion by bacteria and fungus. But the end result is you end up with a volume of wood inside the stem that can no longer conduct sap. Now, if you think about retapping that same tree, so you're drilling a new hole every year, going around the tree, if the tree is too small in diameter, or if it's growing too slowly to compensate for that wood that's no longer conductive, and you go all the way around the tree, then you've created an entire zone around the whole circumference of the tree that's no longer conducting sap. And that can have implications for tree health, and it also has implications for the sustainability of your sap collection enterprise, because then you've used up the whole zone that you can reach where you can put in a tap where you can actually extract sap. So if you filled that whole area that you would want to tap in, so the area that you can reach while you're standing in front of the tree, and it's all non-conductive wood, then you don't have anywhere to tap eventually again. So that's a problem from both a business sustainability standpoint and also a tree health standpoint. And the way we circumvent that is by having tap guidelines that prevent us from creating that scenario. In other words, we have minimum tree size requirements. And so in New York, we don't tap any tree that's under 10 inches in diameter, because if we did, we would be creating that problem where we have covered the whole tappable zone with non-conducting wood in a very short period of time. So that's one thing. And the other recommendation is that we keep our trees, our sugar bush trees, healthy and fast growing. So we have guidelines for thinning our sugar bush to create optimal health. So we're removing suppressed and unhealthy trees. And also just some general forestry practices to avoid damaging the soil or impacting the stems and the residual stand. So we have a lot of guidelines to prevent that scenario. So it is possible to harm trees through improper forest management or improper sap collection, but if it's done properly, it doesn't impact forest health. I hope that was a clear answer. There are a lot of components to it, but in general, we don't impact tree health.
Very clear, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Nice to see a question about mushrooms in the chat. The question is Cornell growing shiitake mushrooms using the methods I've talked about in the presentation? The answer is we aren't right now, but that research has been done at Cornell in the past pretty extensively, and there's a lot of information at the Cornell Small Farms program about the shiitake mushroom industry and the best practices for growing shiitake. We have a lot of old mushroom logs in our sugar bush from abandoned research projects that took place more than 10 years ago, and they should be all burned out. So the fungus should have consumed all the cellulose in those logs long ago. But this spring, we actually had a huge shiitake crop that just came out of nowhere. So that was kind of a nice surprise. Free mushrooms for the maple program staff.
Aaron, I have, I guess, one question looking to the future. So with climate change, is there any kind of prediction of how that's going to affect maple production in the area? Because, you know, it requires, as I understand, these specific temperatures at a time of year with the freezing nights and the days above freezing. Have there been any changes, and you know, what might the outlook be for the future?
Yeah, climate change has created a lot of challenges because it's made the conditions highly variable. So maple syrup production is a traditional industry with a long history and a lot of conventions, like standard practices that have been developed over time. And the convention used to be that there was a very certain specific time of year where you could always plan on tapping your maple trees and producing your sap. And it was usually sometime in early February, you tapped your trees, or mid-February, and then you could expect a pretty good crop of maple syrup through the beginning of April. And what we see now is that the freeze-thaw cycles that are required for sap production are just all over the place, and they're interspersed with periods of really warm weather. So like this year, we actually tapped trees in October. You can collect sap anytime after the trees are dormant and they're a freeze-thaw cycle. So as soon as the leaves are off the trees and we start getting freeze and thaws, you can get sap. And just as part of a total dormant season sap collection study, we tapped a bunch of trees in October, and then we re-tapped them periodically to make sure we get full sap production, and we collected sap until April. And what we saw was that a lot of the traditional part of the season was either too cold or too hot. So it was either we had a 3-foot snowpack and it was 0 degrees, or it was 75 degrees. And neither one of those is really conducive to good sap production. When it's too cold, we don't get any sap. And when it's too warm, we get a proliferation of yeast and bacteria in our collection systems that spoils the sap and makes the tap holes start to get clogged up and produce less sap. But what we did see is in December, which is before the traditional sugaring season, we had a really good crop of syrup. So if people had done what I did and tapped their trees in late October or November, they could have made a huge crop of maple syrup before we even got to New Year's. And then we had another really good season just in the very end of March. So the way we adapt to that is by creating new sap collection technologies that allow our tap holes to stay open longer. So we use check valves in our trees that prevent bacteria from getting into the tap hole and making it dry up faster. We have new filtration technologies, so we can ultra filter our sap down to 0.4 microns to get the bacteria out of the sap when it's too warm, and then it doesn't spoil as quickly. And so we're adapting basically with technology that allows us to collect a longer period of time and to handle the sap better. It's a challenge. There's nothing we can do about climate change, and we really rely on climate to produce our crop. So we really have to adapt.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. All right, well, I guess we should probably be transitioning to our next webinar. So I guess on behalf of Piper and I and Professor Mohammed, Aaron, thank you so much for telling us all about maple syrup production and other forest food production systems and how they're sustainable. They can be a sustainable part of our food system.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here, and I apologize again for the poor internet connection. If you want more information on anything I talked about today, our website is cornellmaple.com, and there's contact information for me there and also a lot of information about our research programs.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone, so long.